Hera asks, how should we draw close to people in order to love them the way Jesus tells us to love, while at the same time maintaining healthy boundaries? And just to up the ante on this, Vince, you've talked about your father, being, having a precondition that makes him more vulnerable. And we know that many of us have people in our lives like that as well. Couldn't we think that when hopefully you'll see you're going to want to see your father at some point, but won't there always be some degree of risk there? Mm-hmm. And even what Joe has touched on about Christians, shouldn't we be out? It seems that's what Christians maybe did in previous pandemics. And yet it seems perhaps that the right response is just to hold back. But in a way, both of you mentioned this idea of comfort, that we don't want to retreat into comfort. So anyhow, all that, I'll just throw all that out there for you guys. But, what does it look like for us to proactively love, even in the midst of this virus being in the background and these protocols of physical distancing?
Yeah. Thanks for making the question that much more challenging before throwing it to us. What kind of colleague are you?
Anytime.
Yeah. And I think maybe one of the things that's been uniquely challenging about this pandemic is actually because your instinct is always to get physically close, isn't it? If your love language is physical affection, to not be able to give someone a hug when they really need it, to not be there physically caring for them, it feels awful. But at the same time, the irony is that whatever action you're taking, whether it's to draw close to someone or it's to step away, I think the point we're trying to make tonight and is that in every sense, a Christian should be guided by the ethic of love, by the ethic of what is best for this person, but also for any other vulnerable people that I might be coming across. So the strange irony of social distancing is actually in this season for the church. The reason why, so many churches have closed and we've stepped away, it is not because we don't care, but actually that has been out of love. That's been out of a desire to say, selfishly, I would want to be near you right now. But I know that if I come close, I risk bringing infection to you, or if you have infection, taking it to other vulnerable people. So the irony here is sometimes the loving thing is to socially distance. But that doesn't mean that you can't show love. And I think one of the wonderful things that we've all, I think, been experiencing in this season is how much you can do through technology. Technology sometimes gets a really bad rap, doesn't it? Look what we're doing tonight that wouldn't be possible without it. And so there are ways to draw nearer to each other, and perhaps even unique ways that God can use that. We've certainly experienced, even as part of our team, that actually some of our times of prayer together have felt even more intimate and vulnerable and personal over Zoom than they sometimes do when you're physically there in the office together. Maybe there's something about having to look someone right in the face when you're talking to them. You feel closer in some ways, but also there's a sense in which when you're going through something so hard but it's communally shared all the way across the world, I think that sense of solidarity brings you together as well. So I think it's just looking for what are the things that you can do, things that don't spread infection, but you can still practically serve. So many churches have been doing amazing things like bringing food to people for those who actually can't step outside the house, for organizing it to be delivered to them. There are practical ways that we can help each other. But also, I think we've seen the church do some really amazing things in this season in terms of the amount they've moved online and how ready they've been to do that. Now, it might not always be the highest production value, but it's about reaching out to people. It was interesting to me that actually in the UK, 1 in 5 people in their 20s and 30s who've never been inside a church have actually watched a service online in the last couple of months. Wow. Because it's these kind of, when you go through something as hard, it stirs up deep questions about life and purpose, and is there anyone out there who cares? So I think the question would be, what can you do that is guided by the ethic of love, that follows in the way of Jesus, that is willing to make hard sacrifices, but maybe the sacrifice you're being asked to make, if you're not a healthcare professional or someone who can't physically serve in certain ways, maybe the sacrifice is not being with people, but the sacrifice is to not be with them. And that is a hard thing for all of us, to not be selfish when we want to get out and we want to just be free and be in the streets, but actually we're choosing to put other people's health and their needs before our own.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up briefly on what you said, Logan, that there will always be some level of risk. And it just reminded me of this New York Times article that I read by Elaine de Botton. He was reflecting on Camus' views on philosophy, and the quote that really stuck in my mind was, it said, "Life is a hospice, never a hospital." And actually, I pulled up the quote while Joe was speaking, and this is what Debatten said. He said, "Plague or no plague, there is always, as it were, the plague. If what we mean by that is a susceptibility to sudden death, an event that can render our lives instantaneously meaningless." Now, as a Christian, I have the hope that death does not render our lives meaningless. It's actually an entry point into the fullness of life. But there is this reality. Part of what we should be thinking through this time is about the fact that it's not as unique of a time as we think it is. Because even as we step out of a pandemic, it's still going to be the case that life is a hospice, not a hospital. And any moment we could be faced with death. And I go back to Abby's words when she couldn't be with her dad. And it's very interesting to me what those words were that she said kept coming out of her mouth on the phone. Thank you. I love you. I'm sorry. 3 sentences that we don't say frequently enough. And it was so obvious to her that those were the words that should be coming out of her mouth towards her dad when she knew he was dying. But the reality is we're all dying. Are we saying those words as frequently as we would like? And the reality is that most people in the world have never had someone ask them for forgiveness. They've never actually experienced the sort of reconciliation that is right at the center and the heart of the Christian faith. That's what we believe we do with God. At some point, we come to a conviction that we fall short of him and that there's a distance that needs to be bridged in order for us to be in relationship with him. And we go to him and we say, I'm imperfect. I've done wrong. Will you forgive me? And then there's a peace that comes as we sense his love responding to that. What better way to spend this time than to think about, is there someone that I need to ask for forgiveness from? Could I give someone an example of what that would look like to ask for forgiveness from God, because they actually don't just hear me talking about it abstractly, propositionally, philosophically, but because I actually go to them and do it, and someone has a real, concrete, tangible experience of reconciliation, which is exactly what we're talking about when we talk about the good news of the Christian faith. So, yes, we're in a pandemic, but in some ways we're always in the plague. What are the words that are consistently coming out of our mouth? Are they the words that point to what's most meaningful in life and to what's most meaningful in our faith as well, not just in an abstract way, but a very concrete way?
Thanks so much, Vince and Joe. I think that's very provocative to think of, in a way, this space and the more intentionality required to have these conversations actually can lead us to think through what are some of the more meaningful, deeper, harder maybe conversations, but the better ones that this season could be a season in which we have. That idea.
So that's good. You put it better than we did. That was well said. What he said.